The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every heartbeat sound like a drum in the desert. Dakota sat alone on the porch of his small adobe home, the wind tugging at his long coat and whistling through the mesquite trees. He had lived here for years, keeping mostly to himself, tending the land he had inherited and protecting the small community that still relied on his knowledge of the harsh terrain. But tonight something was different. Something in the air prickled at the back of his neck, a warning he hadn't felt in decades. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the stillness pause, then 3 more. Each strike was deliberate, measured, unmistakable. Dakota's hand went to the hilt of his knife heart, hammering in his chest. No ordinary visitor knocks in this rhythm. He had heard it once before, many years ago, in the shadows of memory he had tried to forget. That was before everything changed. That was before Waya. He pressed himself against the wooden door, peering through the thin cracks at the shadows stretching across his porch. 2 figures loomed there, impossibly tall, their outlines casting jagged shapes against the moonlight. Dakota's eyes narrowed. No ordinary human could be this large. Their presence was commanding the kind of authority that silenced even the wild wind. The taller one stepped forward, and a deep, measured voice carried through the still night. Dakota, it said, "We know you are here." A second voice, slightly heavier but identical in tone, joined. "We have watched over your home. We know your routines. We know what you keep hidden." The words chilled him, for they spoke of things that no one alive could possibly know. Secrets about his family, about his life, about Waya, the woman who had saved him and changed his path forever. Dakota's mind raced. Waya had died years ago, her voice long silenced by the desert wind, yet the memory of her final words, the promises she had whispered in fevered nights, came rushing back with a clarity he had never expected. She had spoken of debts unpaid, of people who needed help, of dangers lurking just beyond sight. He had dismissed it at the time as the delirium of a dying woman, but now standing on the edge of his porch, he realized her words had been instructions, a map left for him in the fog of grief and memory. The taller figure stepped closer. Her presence filled the doorway like a mountain blocking the sky. "We do not come to harm you," she said, her voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to push the desert night itself back. "But there are matters that cannot be discussed through a door." Dakota glimpsed the second figure, equally imposing her posture, steady, her gaze unyielding. These were women forged in the desert, strong and capable, yet there was something in their eyes that spoke of loyalty and a promise kept over decades. Dakota swallowed hard, realizing that this night was the beginning of a journey he had long avoided, a journey back into the shadows of his past, into the mysteries Waya had left behind. The women Ayani and Kayla had come for a reason, and that reason carried the weight of a promise older than any man on this land. For the first time in years, Dakota felt the old thrill of danger curl in his stomach. The desert was quiet, but not empty. Secrets had found him, and the night had grown alive with the promise of revelations, justice, and a past that refused to stay buried. His hand hovered over the door latch, fingers trembling not with fear, alone but with the sharp anticipation of a story that was about to unfold, one that would test every skill he had learned and every truth he thought he knew. Tonight the desert was watching, and so was his destiny. Dakota's hands shook slightly as he stepped inside the creak of the wooden floorboards echoing through the empty room. Ayani and Kayla moved with deliberate precision, settling near the hearth, their eyes never leaving him. It was then that Dakota remembered Waya, the woman who had saved him more than a decade ago. She had been more than a friend, more than a guide. She had been his protector, his teacher, and the bridge between the harsh world of the desert and the community that had once embraced him. He had long wondered about her past, but until this night, her story had remained just out of reach, a fragment of memory wrapped in mystery. The taller sister, Ayani, spoke first, her voice low and steady. "You remember the scar on your shoulder, don't you, Dakota? The jagged mark from that fight when you were a boy. Dakota's fingers unconsciously brushed the old wound. It had been years since it first ached with memory. The mountain lion that had clawed him during a hunt in the desert. The pain, the fear, and the survival instinct that had been drilled into him by the tribe who had taken him in. It was more than a scar. It was a testament to the lessons Waya had given him, lessons in endurance observation, and the silent strength that kept him alive. Kayla's gaze softened, though her posture remained imposing. "Waya saved you when the Comanche raiders came," she said almost reverently. "You were barely more than a boy, and she brought you to us, taught you our ways, and made sure you would survive. You learned our language, our songs, how to read the land, how to hunt and fight not for sport, but for life." Dakota's mind raced, pieces of memory snapping into place. He remembered the quiet nights under the stars, the sound of drums and chants he had never understood, and the feelings of being both terrified and safe in the same moment. He had thought those years were lost to time, erased by the mundane life he had built since. But now the past was reaching out to him, insisting he remember. Ayani's voice cut through the growing tension. "Before she died, Waya asked you to promise something, to protect those she cared for, to watch over the community she had loved, and to carry on the duty she had begun. She could not know what would come, but she trusted you to act, to make the right choices, even when danger was near." Dakota felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders, heavier than any pack he had carried across the desert. This was not a mere memory. It was a living command, a responsibility as binding as the scar that marred his skin. He sank into the wooden chair, the firelight dancing across his lined face. The truth hit hard. The woman he had trusted, the one whose presence had shaped so much of his life, had kept secrets not out of deception but out of necessity. Waya had carried her past like a shield, protecting him from dangers he could not yet see, yet preparing him for the moment when he would be called to act. Dakota felt both betrayal and gratitude, a conflicted knot of emotions that tugged at his sense of duty and honor. In that quiet room, surrounded by the imposing forms of Ayani and Kayla, Dakota realized the full scope of the promise he had made. It was not simply about loyalty to Waya, it was about courage, judgment, and the responsibility of standing between justice and chaos. For a man of his age, one who had seen enough loss to understand the stakes, it was a reminder that honor demanded action, even when fear whispered to remain hidden. The night outside still held secret shadows and dangers, but for the first time in many years, Dakota felt the fire of purpose rekindle within him. He was not just remembering the past, he was preparing to live it again, to meet the challenge Waya had left for him, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. The wind shifted in the canyon, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves pounding against the dry earth. Dakota's senses sharpened immediately. He had been trained to read every movement, every subtle shift in the desert. From the shadows, 3 riders emerged, their silhouettes ragged but purposeful. At their head was Samuel Burke, a man whose reputation for greed and ruthlessness had spread across the territory like wildfire. Burke had long coveted the water sources that sustained the small ranches, and settlements willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Tonight, it seemed Dakota, Ayani, and Kayla were in that line of fire. Dakota crouched low behind a rock, his bow in hand, eyes scanning the approaching group. He knew every inch of this land, the hidden gullies, the dry creek beds, the thorned thickets, where a man could vanish if he moved carefully. He whispered to Ayani and Kayla, and they nodded, understanding the plan without a single word. This would not be a battle of brute strength alone. Strategy, patience, and precision would be their greatest weapons. The first scout rode too close, careless, and Dakota let the arrow fly. It struck the man's shoulder with a sharp thwack, and he toppled from his horse, groaning. The others hesitated, confusion spreading among them. That split second of hesitation was all Ayani needed. She stepped from behind the low wall of the barn, her enormous frame moving with uncanny speed. One hand disarmed a man twisting the rifle from his grasp, while the other delivered a blow that sent him sprawling. Kayla flanked the group, intercepting the second wave with a combination of brute force and precise grapples, ensuring no one could regroup quickly. Despite their size and strength, the sisters moved with the careful discipline of warriors trained to strike decisively and retreat just as quickly. They used the landscape, the shadows, and Takota's knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Each step, each maneuver was calculated. The sound of arrows whistling, the crack of rifles fired blindly, and the grunt of men struck down created a rhythm that seemed almost choreographed, a deadly dance where survival depended on wits as much as on skill. As Burke realized his men were faltering, he shouted orders, attempting to rally them, but Takota anticipated every move. He darted from one vantage point to another, striking from the shadows, disappearing before the rifles could find him. Ayani intercepted a charging rider, her hands like iron redirecting him straight into Kayla's path, who immobilized him with a precision that left no room for escape. Every attack, every countermove was a testament to years of training discipline and an unyielding commitment to protect those they cared for. But it was not enough to rely on strength alone. The trio understood the stakes, the lives of innocent people, and the integrity of the land hung in the balance. Takota lured Marshal Garrett, who had been observing from the edge of the canyon, into a conversation, buying precious minutes. He spoke calmly, deliberately, planting seeds of doubt, while Ayani and Kayla continued to neutralize threats. It was a game of psychology as much as a battle. They needed time to secure the evidence hidden in Burke's camp, the papers that would ultimately bring the corrupt to justice. The confrontation reached its peak when Burke himself attempted to charge the Homestead, fury blazing in his eyes. Arrows flew with unerring accuracy, rifles discharged into the dark, and the sisters moved like twin shadows of judgment. Burke's plans unraveled before him. His men were incapacitated, disarmed, or fleeing. Takota stepped forward, the firelight glinting off his bow, knowing that one misstep could cost lives, but also knowing that hesitation would allow the greedy to claim what was not theirs. By the time the dust settled, the group stood victorious, though not unscathed. Takota's chest heaved with exertion, and the sisters' movements slowed slightly, but the land was safe, and the innocent were protected. They had used every ounce of skill, courage, and intelligence to counter greed and corruption, proving that even in a world dominated by brutality, strategy and honor could prevail. The canyon fell silent once more, the echoes of the night's conflict fading into the vast desert, leaving Takota and the sisters to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead, the secrets yet to be uncovered, and the promise Waya had entrusted to them. As the last echoes of the skirmish faded into the desert night, Takota, Ayani, and Kayla turned their attention to the remnants of Burke's camp. It was here, among overturned crates and scattered papers, that Takota's eyes fell upon a bundle carefully wrapped in oilcloth, the one Waya had instructed him to find if danger ever returned. He untied it, revealing stacks of letters, contracts, and meticulously drawn maps. Each document told a story of greed, murder, and corruption that stretched across the territory. Burke had been orchestrating a calculated takeover of water sources, bribing officials, and silencing anyone who stood in his way. The evidence was irrefutable, a silent testament to the crimes that had threatened not just Takota, but every settler and rancher whose survival depended on these resources. Ayani carefully examined a letter addressed to Burke, outlining the plan to eliminate opposition through intimidation and, if necessary, lethal force. Kayla spread a map across a flat rock pointing to the network of springs and streams that Burke sought to monopolize. Every property marked here, she said, controls the lifeblood of the settlements downstream. If we fail, the land, the people, and the justice we serve will all be lost. Takota felt a surge of responsibility, the weight of Waya's promise settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her foresight had given them the means to strike back, and now it was their turn to act with courage and intelligence. With the evidence in hand, Takota moved cautiously toward the town, sending word to the nearest federal authorities. Within hours, soldiers, judges, and government officials arrived, their presence turning the once quiet canyon into a hub of legal and military intervention. Burke and his remaining accomplices were swiftly apprehended, their plans unraveling in the face of undeniable proof. Dakota watched as the corrupt men were led away in chains, their faces pale with disbelief. The fear and arrogance that had driven them to exploit the land and its people were now replaced with the cold reality of justice. In the midst of the commotion, Dakota ensured that the innocent were protected. Families who had been threatened, ranchers whose livelihoods hung in the balance, and even those who had doubted him in the past could now breathe freely. The community, which had endured under the shadow of Burke's schemes, felt a collective release, a sense that fairness and order had been restored. Dakota, Ayani, and Kayla had not only survived the confrontation, they had safeguarded the lives, homes, and dignity of those who could not defend themselves. The satisfaction was quiet but profound. Dakota thought of Waya and the wisdom she had imparted, her planning and courage extending beyond her own life. Her understanding of human nature, her ability to anticipate treachery, and her insistence on protecting the vulnerable had all culminated in this moment. It was more than a victory. It was proof that strategy, intelligence, and moral fortitude could triumph over raw greed and brutality. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, painting the desert with soft amber light, Dakota reflected on the lessons of the night. Courage was not simply about facing danger with weapons in hand. It was about foresight, preparation, and the willingness to act when responsibility demanded it. Justice required vigilance, and even one person's determination, guided by honor and past promises, could tip the balance against corruption. The community's trust, once tentative, now stood solid, reaffirmed by the triumph of right over might. For the viewers, particularly those who had lived long enough to understand the value of perseverance and integrity, the night's events were a reminder standing up for what is right, even when it is perilous, preserves not only the immediate lives at stake, but the principles that sustain society. Dakota's actions embodied this timeless lesson, illustrating that intelligence, courage, and commitment to duty could protect both people and land from exploitation. By the time the canyon returned to its quiet, Dakota, Ayani, and Kayla stood together, their eyes scanning the terrain they had defended. The documents secured the guilty in custody and the innocent safe. There was a deep sense of closure. Yet beneath that calm, the lesson remained vivid. Vigilance, honor, and decisive action are necessary to preserve justice in a world where greed and corruption never sleep. For Dakota and his companions, the night had reaffirmed that bravery was measured not just in skill, but in the choices one made when confronted with injustice. The first light of dawn stretched over the horizon, painting the desert in soft hues of gold and rose. Dakota stood at the edge of his land, the cool morning breeze brushing against his face as he gazed down at the crystal-clear spring that had long been the lifeblood of the surrounding communities. For years, this water had been coveted, threatened by greed and corruption, but tonight it flowed freely, unclaimed and untarnished. Beside him, the familiar silhouettes of Ayani and Kayla moved toward their horses, their massive forms framed by the rising sun. The sisters had completed the mission Waya had entrusted to them, their vigilance and skill, ensuring that the land, the innocent, and the truth remained protected. Dakota inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the night's events settle in his chest. Every arrow shot, every calculated maneuver, every moment of patience and courage had brought them to this point. He thought of Waya, whose foresight and bravery had guided them even beyond her own life. Her wisdom had not only saved Dakota, but had preserved a community from ruin. The desert, harsh and unyielding as it was, had once again witnessed the triumph of intelligence, honor, and dedication over fear and tyranny. The lessons of this night were clear. Courage tempered by strategy and guided by principle could alter the course of history, not only for a single person, but for an entire community. Dakota understood now that bravery was not measured solely in physical might, but in the resolve to act rightly, even when danger threatened and the stakes were impossibly high. Loyalty to one's values and to those who depend on you could change outcomes in ways that mere strength could never achieve. Ayani and Kayla approached him one last time, their expressions softened by the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. "Waya chose wisely," Ayani said quietly. "You have honored her trust." Kayla nodded, her gaze lingering on Dakota, the acknowledgement of shared struggle and victory passing silently between them. The bond forged in the crucible of conflict was unspoken, yet undeniable, a testament to the enduring power of respect, cooperation, and shared responsibility. As the sisters mounted their horses and rode toward the breaking dawn, Dakota remained rooted to the spot. The land was safe, the conspirators neutralized, and the people he had vowed to protect could continue their lives without fear. Yet beyond the immediate relief, he felt a deeper satisfaction, the knowledge that honorable action, even in the face of overwhelming odds, left a legacy that would endure. Waya's silent sacrifices, Dakota's courage, and the sisters' unwavering vigilance had created a ripple effect that would benefit generations to come. For those watching, especially men who had navigated the challenges of life, career, and family, the story resonated beyond the confines of the desert. It was a reminder that honor, duty, and timely decisions hold profound significance, even in a modern world that often rewards expedience over principle. Dakota's journey illustrated that while danger and deception may loom, integrity and thoughtful action remain among the most powerful tools a person can wield. The desert, with its unforgiving terrain and stark beauty, became a mirror reflecting the enduring truths of responsibility, courage, and perseverance. Dakota finally turned toward the spring, kneeling to touch the water with reverence. The sun glimmered on its surface, a symbol of clarity, renewal, and the continuation of life. He thought of Waya, Ayani, and Kayla, of every choice that had brought him here, and felt a quiet pride in the lineage of courage and wisdom that had guided him. This was more than survival. It was the preservation of justice, the affirmation of human dignity, and the realization that selfless acts, even those unseen or unsung, carry enduring power. And so, with the first warmth of morning on his shoulders and the land stretching safe before him, Dakota spoke softly to the horizon, a vow renewed to live with honor, to protect the innocent, and to carry forward the lessons entrusted to him. The sisters disappeared into the sunrise, leaving only the imprint of their presence and the assurance that justice had been served. If the story of Dakota and the two Apache warriors inspired you, consider following epic Western stories. Share this tale, like it, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can continue exploring the courage, honor, and humanity that define the legends of the Wild West. Thank you for journeying with us.